We believe that videos, images, words, and sounds have the absolute power to inform, inspire, and entertain. We are united under the virtues of safety and knowledge. We are a training community of learners and teachers who encourage and energize each other to achieve greatness. We are pilots, videographers, photographers, freelancers, business owners, enthusiasts, experts, and apprentices. We are creators. We are the Drone U.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another phenomenal episode of Ask Drone U. My name is Paul.
My name is Rob, and phenomenal indeed, Paul. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's a big podcast because...
Talking about the Phantom 4, Rob. Do we really need one? What do people think who have one? Can they give us our initial thoughts? What's really underneath the skin of the Phantom 4? All those questions and more, Rob, are going to be answered.
And not to mention, it is our 300th podcast.
It is our
which is pretty cool.
It is our 300th podcast. I cannot believe 300 episodes later we are sitting here. I mean,
it's very cool.
Remember the first one.
So if ever there was a day to thank everybody for joining us, it would be today, number 300.
Definitely.
Right? So thank you guys for making the podcast what it is.
That it means a lot to us. And for the birthday of the podcast, if you want to give it a share, that would be a great present to us.
Absolutely.
But for today, we're going to bring on Eric Chang, who's a former DJI employee. If you remember, Rob, Eric was kind of like the front man of DJI. He announced the X5, he announced the Osmo, he announced a lot of the products, and he was kind of always the go-to guy at DJI.
And he's got a really interesting background, too, in terms of photography and videography and so forth. So he has some great insight into what the P4 can do and can't do, et cetera.
Absolutely. And he's had limited time with it, but he has had time with it, which is important. And then we're also going to bring on Andrew Baker, who is a Honeywell engineer, sometimes software engineer, sometimes mechanical engineer.
Sounds like he's done it all.
He is incredibly smart.
Maybe he hasn't designed any bridges, but other than that, I think he's done just about everything.
He is incredibly smart, and he does work for their aeronautics division. So he has an incredible, vast knowledge on drones. I actually went to college with Andrew a while back ago, believe it or not.
Cool.
That may not look right because he's a little older than I am, but it is true.
You were a prodigy, 12 years old in college?
12 years old and a half.
Sweet.
I got to say, though, it was kind of difficult because I got my first girlfriend at 13. I didn't know what to do.
I don't want to hear any of that story.
Anyway, guys, let's just get right into the Phantom 4. Let's get right in with Eric Chang. What do you say, Rob?
Let's do it.
Hey, Eric, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, no, thank you, sir. Your time is definitely appreciated. So for those of you who don't know Eric is, I would say in the drone world, definitely one of the chiefs of chiefs. I mean, he is really the guy who has he has a book out. He has been the master of aerial photography, worked for DJI. So, Eric, I'm not very good at explaining who you are, so can you give us a brief history?
Oh, brief history. So I guess my background is in both technology. I was a computer science guy. But I kind of got derailed from the tech industry for a while and ended up as a creative image maker. So I was a professional photographer and a publisher for about 10 years. And then I got sucked back into technology through computer vision and camera technology, which led eventually to drones. And I guess, I've been trying, it's funny because I don't have a full-time job right now. And because I left DJI, a few months ago. And you look like you want to.
Yeah, I was going to say,
something.
So what have you been doing since you left DJI? I think that's a question, too. A lot of people want to know.
Yeah, I've been doing some drone-related projects. One that I have really enjoyed doing is this Nature Conservancy project, which you might have heard about, but it's a citizen science kind of El Nino monitoring program. So the idea is that if you have a drone or even a cell phone, basically any camera that has GPS metadata, you can go out and take pictures of the California coastline during high tide events and storm events. And basically it gives the Nature Conservancy a baseline, to work with for, sea level change models going forward. So these are the sorts of things that I didn't really have time to do when I was with DJI full time. And, my heart's really in the ocean. I spent, the 10 years I spent doing photography was all underwater. So it's kind of funny that I ended up doing aerial work But I guess the summary is that I love to play in that space, kind of in what new technology unlocks for people, mostly around imaging.
It's very cool. Now, I guess you could say, though, that your underwater skills and your aerial skills could come together in things like, the splash drone and, waterproof drones. So there could be that connection there, I would say. But hey, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, actually, the thing that I kind of discovered when I moved into drones is that the way of thinking is very similar to the way we think underwater. Because we have freedom of motion in 3 dimensions underwater. That's something we didn't have on land before drones, at least not very easily. And so actually there's much more connection, much more of a connection between those two worlds than you might think.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So, hey, you're here today to talk about your experience with the Phantom 4. And again, I think of you as one of the pros in the community. You have a book that has come out on aerial photography. And I really want to know, what are your initial thoughts? I want to know just kind of how your experience has been so far. I mean, you have such a great perspective from all the different types of work that you have done and also the role that you played with DJI. And I think people are very interested to know on a deeper level, what you think about this new product.
Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about the Phantom 4 from 2 different perspectives. And one is that as someone who was in the drone industry relatively early, I mean, I came in after, hobbyists had been doing it for many years, but I would say the consumer drone industry. And from someone who's been in it for a while, who's a relatively competent pilot, I'm very excited about the new technologies that basically are there for beginners. I mean, I think some of the new tech will be really helpful even for experienced pilots. But mostly, I've been saying for a long time that in order for drones to really be accepted by the general public, they need to be basically crash-proof. And this is a really good first step. I think the thing that drones have been missing this whole time is an awareness of the world around them. They have one camera. Yes, you can run structure from motion algorithms, or if you have enough compute on the drone, you can get 3D data if the drone's moving, because you need parallax basically for 3D data. And so having stereo cameras, at least in 2 directions, is a really, really great start. And we've seen other drone manufacturers, or I guess I should say announced drone companies that don't really exist yet, talking about this tech and promising it. But the fact that DJI just came out with it, they sort of jumped the gun, really, right?
So you're talking about the unique drone that we saw at CES. The press was all about it, and we haven't seen it actually on the market yet. And you're saying DJI's Phantom 4 is kind of jumping the line here and getting it out, and also at a cheaper level. I know Unique lowered the price of the new Typhoon H, but it's still, as far as I understand it, and I could be wrong, it's $13.99, and then the Real Sense is an additional cost on top of that.
Right. It is going to be an additional cost, as far as I understand, and there's a lot of confusion out there. If you look at folks who, basically the DJI haters out there, they love to comment on every video, basically, and they say, well, Unique Typhoon H is going to be it. And it might be. I actually really am excited that Unique is around, because they are basically in position to compete with DJI if they can get a few things together. And and I think they're a sign of what drone companies are now, who are getting later in the game, even though they've been in the hobby forever. Unique's been around for a long time. But the fact that they partnered with Intel, and it kind of jumpstarts their ability to put sensors that can do basically 3D reconstruction of the world in their drones without having to develop their own technology is great. And I think that's a real indicator. What I took away from CES was not that there were suddenly dozens of drone companies. I think most of those drone companies were there basically for reasons that nobody can understand. They had products that were basically just knockoff products. But what I was really excited about were the new features coming into platforms. And that was basically around sensing the world, giving the drone enough smarts to start to fly autonomously without crashing into things. And DJI, of course, has been working on this technology for a long time. They were less public about it, but I think it was pretty amazing to see them just suddenly come out with something that, and we see, like, you see massive convergence in the market. You see Intel and Qualcomm doing it as a platform play, and then all these companies. I think it's just going to be kind of the standard requirements for drones going forward.
Interesting. So one of the things I read in your article, which was on drone.farm, is you were talking about the different ways that those stereo cameras actually work, as far as which flight mode you're in and whether they'll actually stop a crash or avoid an obstacle and continue flying. I believe you said if you're in manual flight, the P4 will stop before it hits obstacles, but if you're in, say, tap fly mode, it will avoid the obstacle and continue flying. So not only are they introducing obstacle avoidance, it seems like they're taking it a few levels deeper by having different reactions dependent on the flight mode. So what has your experience been with that, and what do you think about all that?
I mean, my direct experience are basically non-existent. I think the P4 has just started arriving at people's doorsteps, and we're seeing a lot of activity online about them. And I would bet that these sorts of the algorithms that are being used to avoid objects are being worked on very, very hard right now. While the first products are going to customers, as is typical for any company that moves very fast. And so I think it's going to take a while before we figure out what the right kind of behavior is, because if you're a gamer, for example, you play first-person, FPV shooters or something, and you walk into a wall, but you're sort of at an angle, you kind of expect to slide along that wall, right? You expect to slide around the obstacle. So is that the right behavior for drones? I mean, when I saw the Unique demo at the Intel booth, that's kind of what it did. If you looked at what the pilot was doing, he's flying towards this column in the middle of the net, and the drone's sort of sliding around it. That's my understanding. Right? So the question is, do you, as a pilot, expect the drone just to stop? I sort of don't expect the drone just to stop. I feel like if you're flying towards an object and the drone wants to avoid it, and you're also giving it, say you're rolling also to the left at the same time, I sort of expect it to slide around. And I think that's sort of that nuanced feel is going to take a while to figure out. So it's easier to do these sorts of things in autonomous flight mode where, you've tapped on a particular location and you say, go there. The drone knows you want to go there, and it knows you want to go around. And it's not relying on you telling it what direction to go around it. So my understanding is that the drone, as it ships, will go over objects, and that going around objects is something that's still being developed.
Interesting. Okay, very cool. Thank you for differentiating that. There's some other things that I saw is that we are seeing some new redundancy features. We're seeing dual IMUs, dual compasses. Do you think that's going to help add in things like long exposure aerials or aerial long exposures, excuse me? And do you see any other benefits?
I think the primary benefit is reliability. I think redundancy is going to be required for drones if we want to keep them as safe as possible. Because, I think like if your magnetometer, if your compass goes, the drone basically doesn't know what direction it's going unless it's moving, in which case you can use GPS, and GPS is kind of sloppy, So, and of course, if your IMU goes, you probably have had that experience. A lot of bad things happen. And it basically can't fly itself. So I think, primarily it's about redundancy. I know DJI is saying it's 5 times more stable or something. There's a number, and for people who have had, serious time, which basically only DJI employees so far have said it does feel a lot more stable. But I would bet that the combination of dual IMUs, dual compasses, also stereo camera facing down, instead of that single optical flow camera plus ultrasonic, they now have stereo cameras. So they're able to get much more precise data about the distance to the ground and obstacles below them. So those things all probably lead to a much more stable drone. In terms of long exposures, I actually haven't had many problems already. You can take a multi-second exposure. Multi-second exposure, that's crazy. If you're a photographer, it kind of blows your mind that you you can have something that's floating in the air taking multi-second exposures.
Yeah, it's like a tripod in the sky.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Have you had your hands on any raw photos out of the P4? Have you been able to play with any photos? Because I know people are saying, well, The Phantom 4 is the same camera sensor, and a lot of people were looking for an upgraded sensor. And this is the same sensor, but they're saying it's different glass. Have you had any experience?
I actually have not, but I think it's really good timing because the internet is about to be flooded with raw photos.
Yeah, that's
of
true.
Phantom 4. So I think it won't be long before someone does the definitive test. I just haven't had my hands on one for long enough to do that. And but I'm pretty interested. I don't feel like we need. I feel like we're butting up against sensor size constraints right now. I mean, there's a reason that every camera that's kind of in the high end of small sensor is 12 megapixel, it shoots 4K and with the same specs. They're all running Ambarella. They all use the same camera on a chip behind the scenes. And so they're all going to have pretty comparable image quality. I mean, there's a lot of tuning required. There's a huge amount of work. And I think DJI has done a pretty good job. But the fact that you're shooting 4K in such a small sensor with such a fairly inexpensive and small optics also means that I don't really feel like any of these 4K cameras hold up at 4K anyway. So we're really just trying to. I mean, what's good enough? I think the Phantom 4, Phantom 3, GoPros, they all shoot good enough, and if you're in really good conditions, they're pretty good. But there's just there's kind of a fundamental problem here, which is that the underlying tech is only moving so fast, and we need a big leap before things are going to get better at a small size.
Interesting. Speaking about, technology taking a leap forward, I know DJI put a much larger battery in the Phantom 4 itself, and I know you've had limited experience with it. Do you see the technology shifting with batteries anytime soon? I mean, it seems like we're just making bigger and bigger batteries, and the drones are fitting larger and larger batteries.
Yeah, and it's diminishing returns, as you know, if you start to weigh down a drone with batteries. Batteries are a problem, and it's just going to move more slowly than everything else in the system. I think there are solutions for much longer lasting power sources like fuel cells, but they're not really practical for consumer use.
Yeah.
And I just don't believe anyone's going to, drive their batteries somewhere to fill them with hydrogen,
Yeah, that's true.
And so it's a fundamental problem. But the other thing is for consumer use, 20 minutes, I've never had problems with that kind of flight time. And I think for specialized use, yes, there are some issues. Military use, surveillance, these sorts of things, they're saying, I hear very commonly kind of 50 minutes to an hour is kind of the sweet spot, cutoff point for useful. And we can get there with larger drones. Everything's a trade-off. But personally, I would much rather have something that is smaller and more easily backpackable that runs for 15 minutes or even 12 minutes. I think you can get the shot in that amount of time. And no one's going to watch 15 minutes of video, especially just video of some random subject.
Yeah.
15 minutes is like a produced piece that has potentially many hours of shots that are edited into one thing. So if you're posting 15-minute videos of nothing, then that's another problem.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. So recently I heard from one of my friends in DC that Homeland is vetting the NPRM 107, and it's like one of the last things holding up the 107. They expect to see that coming out in June. And I think the general trend here is that with micro UAS and all the bills we're seeing in Congress and Senate right now about micro UAS and 107, do you think the Phantom 4 is playing a major role in, like you said earlier, in the perception of drones with the public? Because, NBC is now coming out with articles, BBC, that the FAA says, the danger and risk to planes is really not as much as we thought it was. Do you think the Phantom 4, has some sort of role as a whole in the market for getting micro UAS kind of passed? Is this also, I guess, DJI's answer to the regulatory issues that we've seen here in the States?
I actually don't. I don't think the Phantom 4 specifically has a role, but I think the underlying tech can only help. If it prevents it from hitting things in general, and of course there are altitude limitations and geofencing, and the geofencing is getting a lot more complicated. And along with the sorts of features that higher end users have been asking for, like unlock. You can unlock the ability to fly in a no-fly zone if you have the right credentials and you're willing to identify yourself. Basically, you give a credit card number, so that if there's a subpoena, it can be traced back to you. And in theory, you're flying legally, so it's not an issue. So those are the sorts of technologies I think that I haven't seen addressed that much in the rules. And I think it's because, from DJI's perspective, from a lot of folks in the industry, from their perspective, it's about putting the onus on the operator for behaving responsibly. And of course, the gear shouldn't do things that you haven't asked it to do, right? The equipment shouldn't do it. So I think that, one of the big issues with autonomous flight is going to be a liability issue. If you have tapped and you told it to go somewhere and it's flying by itself and it avoids an object and something happens as a result of that autonomous movement, is someone going to go after DJI? I don't know. I mean, we've heard lots of folks dealing with liability issues as they try to kind of unlock their organizations, to get them in the air legally. And one of the big issues is liability. And I don't think we know yet what the effect autonomy will have on liability.
That's a really good point, because a lot of people are flying out there and they're not, buying insurance. So, there's a lot of, I guess, risk, you could say, for operators out there, a lot of risk for pilots as well. And then you ask the question of what about a company and if they don't have the right type of aviation insurance. So really good point. One question I wanted to ask you, and this came from our membership, is do you think the Phantom 4 would have a negative effect on existing videographers, cinematographers? And the example the person gave was, think of what the DSLR did to wedding photographers.
Well, there are still plenty of very successful wedding photographers who have adapted to new technology. And, the folks who didn't adapt, of course, kind of went away. And I think that's always the way it's going to be. I don't think anything the Phantom 4 does makes the output more beautiful. You can fly as a relatively inexperienced pilot now. You can kind of tap around and you can control the gimbal, these sorts of things. You can do an orbit, and the orbits might be better than a pilot could do, unless you're really experienced. But I haven't seen anything from an autonomous system that looks as good as something that a competent pilot can do. Now, I have seen some kind of programs in development that are designed for cinematography. So the idea is that it's kind of like cable cam on Solo. You have waypoints and a way to move between the waypoints. You can speed up and slow down, control the gimbal. Those are things that I think are just tools for cinematographers. They're just additional tools. If you don't know how to use them, the footage is still not going to be very compelling.
Yeah.
So I think it's always going to be the case, and we're moving in this direction where you can get someone in the air to do something that isn't very good for not much money.
Yeah.
But I think, general competence in storytelling is still a rare commodity.
Yeah, I agree. So when you've had your hands on the Phantom 4, do you have any major takeaways, anything that you would want to share with everyone who's thinking about it or thinking about buying one?
I think most people I've talked to have had similar conclusions as me, which is that if you have a Phantom 3 and you're a competent pilot, I don't know what you're going to get from the Phantom 4 other than a little bit of insurance for crash proofing. And for me, I think the two things, and this is what basically the conclusions that I came to that I wrote about in the article, were the things that I really want are sport mode. I want to be able to get to destinations faster. I find the current one a little bit limiting because, like the volcano thing, which is probably the thing I'm most known for in Iceland, was a mile away. And it took, a few minutes to fly there, and I had to fly, with someone else in view the whole time. And I would have loved to get there a minute faster, so that we had more time in the air. And I've already seen in Ken Booth's beta testing, actually, that one of his units was saved from a crash by the vision system on return to home. So lost line of sight, ended up coming back, or lost situational awareness, I should say. Something came between him and and the Phantom 4. And on its way back, it basically stopped before it hit a tree and hovered. And he was able to regain control, while it sat there hovering.
That's
so I think,
cool.
those are things that are really great. And they're, it's a good kind of real world application of the tech. I don't think people should be expecting this first system with this kind of vision system to be magic. Like it's not,
Yeah.
it just doesn't work that way. It's a huge improvement for certain people. If you tend to crash, you should get it. It'd be great, but you might also decide you want to fly backwards. That doesn't protect you from crashing.
That's a
if you're
good
flying
point.
backwards. So
Do you see any potential problems with the Phantom 4 or any like marketing promises?
I don't think DJI has made any weird marketing promises on the Phantom 4. The videos look pretty realistic to me. It's funny. I just saw a video of there's a Jaguar like the car racing an Inspire, and DJI didn't put it out. Jaguar put it out, but it was totally manufactured. It's like they just recorded these things flying around and cut it together to look like a race. And I think, okay, well, I don't know what the point of that is, other than that it looks cool. But other drone companies, especially Kickstarter companies, are doing crazy stuff with expectations that cannot be met. And I think those are going to be, they're sort of setting themselves up for failure, because anyone who's pre-ordered one is going to get it and say, well, it doesn't do what it says it does. I mean, has there been a Kickstarter drone project yet that people have been happy with?
Well, I would say the Splash drone is probably the only one that I know. And I would say that only because we tested one. We wanted to make sure that it really could, do the payload deployment. We wanted to make sure it was really waterproof. And so far, our experience has been pretty positive with that. But I am familiar with people, like Trent, who works for Unique. He bought one of those small little racing drones. He wasn't happy with it. And then, the best example is clearly the Lily, the promise of, hey, here you go, fly, and that you can just land something with propellers spinning in your hand. I mean, that sounds like a good idea, right? So,
so Lily remains that, they might actually ship something, but I agree. I think the hand launch, hand catch is a problem. And the video also doesn't really say much about what it's supposed to do. So that leads potentially to false expectations.
Yeah.
But it's great. So Splash is a really good example, because I think they promised exactly what they delivered, and I think that's the way to do it in this industry. So, you can't fool people, because you're going to deliver this physical product that does something, and if it doesn't do what you think it's going to do, it's people aren't going to be happy.
Yeah, that's very
I don't know.
true.
Have you seen anything that the Phantom 4 is supposed to do that you don't think it's going to do?
Yeah, well, I to be honest, I just reached out to Romeo and marketing at DJI to try to get our hands on one to do a test on the guidance system itself, or the obstacle avoid, sense and avoid system itself, because I have questions like how fast can you go and it still work? I saw a video on Facebook, pretty sure from a mutual friend of ours, who posted that they were flying it around in Florida near a highway overpass, and the sense and avoid didn't see the pole. So my question is, with the VPS system on the Phantom 3, there has to be, a stark amount of contrast in order for that to work. That's why you see people at conferences, have the little tapes where they tape down squares, so there's like contrast. So I'm wondering if the Phantom 4's forward obstacle avoidance would have that same issue, where it needs significant amounts of contrast in order to work. So, would it run into a pole? How fast can we actually fly? So yes, I do. And not to try to get at DJI, but really just because I want to learn the limitations of the systems.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And that's exactly what I meant by not expecting magic. It's still a visual, it's a camera that uses a visual system to avoid objects. So, the same things that confuse birds, for example, will probably confuse this thing, or humans, confuse humans. If strongly backlit, no vision system does that yet, basically. And small things like wires, poles. I don't know if it's a light colored pole and a light background, might have problems. Glass reflections. These are the sorts of things that are currently hard for vision systems. I think going forward, I think sensor fusion is kind of the answer. You want to bounce something off of an object. You want ultrasonic or LiDAR or something that that's augments a vision system. And all of these things together are really going to be the answer in the long term for drones that are impossible to crash.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. I agree with you that the Phantom 4 is definitely going to play, or it's providing that need to public where they'll trust drones if they can avoid obstacles. So I definitely think that we're on the right path there. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Greatly appreciate it.
Sure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Eric. And guys, back to you in the studio, Rob. Oh, what an amazing overview of the Phantom 4. I mean, to have someone with his stature kind of go over this and show us what he thinks, the promises, the marketing promises, but also kind of more details behind the drone itself. I mean, so valuable.
Yeah, very insightful. Obviously, his experience with DJI, with just the way that these cameras work in conjunction with the drone, all those different insights are very, very helpful. And I think people are going to get a lot out of that interview.
Definitely. Now, guys, let's transition over to Andrew Baker, who's taken apart his Phantom 4 and can give us an insight on the Phantom 4. Now, if you remember, the Phantoms used to be kind of modular. Like, you could take the flight controller out.
A few screws.
Yeah, you could, change things up. And those days are over. So let's get into the Phantom 4. And here is Andrew Baker. Hey, everyone, and we're back here with my buddy Andrew Baker. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for your time, as I know it is valuable. Now, the reason we want to talk to Andrew is because Andrew is kind of the tech expert. He is someone who I respect very highly when it comes to the technical aspects of drones, how they work, and how that can affect our relationship with the vehicle, and also how it would affect our business decisions. Now, Andrew, for those of you who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I live here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm an engineer for Honeywell, which is a large aerospace company out here. I've been there close to 20 years now, within a wide range of roles, from systems engineer to software engineer to manufacturing engineer. I did some flight testing, so I've pretty much seen it all in the aerospace arena. But outside of work, I'm heavily involved in the RC community. And then about 3 years ago, when the multi-rotors became popular, I just naturally gravitated towards those. And it was actually because of you, Paul, that I kind of got hooked.
Oh, well, I don't know if it's because of me, but I remember meeting you at a college, which, by the way, I need to send you an email about. Let me forget. About at a college in Phoenix, and we went out and hiked behind your house and flew for the first time. It was when I had a Phantom 1. The Phantom 1s were just coming out, and I remember you had a Blade, and it was a fun time. It was a lot of fun.
I had that Blade 350 QX, and you showed up with the Phantom, and I'd never even heard of DJI up to that point, but Paul let me fly it, and the rest is history. I mean, I was just addicted to how smooth and stable that was, and that was just the Phantom 1 now, and now we're up to the 4.
I know, isn't that crazy? In just 3 short years. So now, one of the things that you do, Andrew, is you kind of take drones apart, and you want to see what's underneath the cover, what's being marketed, what's really there. And one of the things that I talked to you about was that the Solo seems to be a very upgradable platform. It has the ports for it, it has the computing power, which you think, well, you can give us your opinions on that, but more importantly, what have you found on the Phantom 4? I know you've taken one apart. What have you found?
It's very difficult to take apart.
All right, well, on that bombshell.
I mean, DJI has a different design philosophy than 3D robotics. 3D robotics rose up from the do-it-yourself community under Chris Anderson. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, it was all about buying the parts and building your own quadcopter. And then they came out with the Iris, and now the Solo is their go-to platform. And they made that completely modularized so that virtually any component on there can be upgraded. Whereas DJI is more of you get what you buy, They don't really want you tampering with it.
Now, if I remember, the Phantom 2 had the NASA flight controller in it. We could literally take a broken Phantom 2 apart, take the flight controller out of it, and put it in something else. And then the Phantom 3 was more kind of compact, all on one board, and it looks like the Phantom 4 is even more.
Yeah, I have my old Phantom 2 here with the cover off, and you can see here a lot of people did tinker with these, including myself. And for the first thing I did, I removed the stock receiver on there, and I put in a Futaba receiver. And that allowed me to use my own transmitter instead of DJI's proprietary transmitter. The flight controller itself wasn't upgradable, but you could still take this apart fairly easily. The cover only had 12 screws on it, and it came off rather simply.
Now the stark contrast to the Phantom 4.
Yeah, the Phantom 4 is virtually tamper-proof. I mean, it took me 3 hours just to get the two housings apart. Because, when I buy these, my goal is to actually fly them too at some point, and I don't want to permanently damage them.
Yeah. So do you still have the Phantom 4 apart? Could you show it to us?
Oh, yeah, I sure do. So has basically two shells. So here's the bottom half right here. The only thing of importance in the bottom half are the antenna, and also there's two compasses in this version of the Phantom 4, and both compass sensors are located in the two forward legs. But then in addition, each leg has its own separate receiver and transmitter. Two are probably for the video feed, and two are probably for the controller link. But yeah, you can't really get to the antennas themselves. There is a axis hatch here that you can remove, and then I tried to pull this plastic apart because I saw the seam and I thought it would come apart, but it's actually not meant to come apart as part of the forming process of the leg.
Oh.
So I actually broke it a little bit, but a little bit of glue will put that back together.
Flight worthy.
But the other half is where all the excitement is.
Yeah, let's see it.
Here's the top half here, and you can see most of the components are fastened to this magnesium alloy shell. And this is the first time we've actually seen magnesium used in a drone like this before. People are familiar with this alloy because it's very popular for like camera bodies, because it's very light, very strong.
What's the benefit of having that, do you think?
It's a lot more stronger and lighter than actually the plastic frame itself.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And it's very resistant to dampening. So as both of us know, when you're flying your copter, there's a lot of vibrations going on and stuff, and you want the arms to be as stiff as possible. So they designed this magnesium frame to be kind of the skeleton of the whole copter.
Wow, very cool. Now, the motors look bigger, but I hear they're the exact same motors, that they just sit higher on the arm. Is that true?
Yeah, I couldn't find any detailed information on the motors. Unfortunately, there aren't any markings on here, and DJI is not selling them separately. They do just pop off like this. You can see them here. What's kind of unique is they have this vent here. You see this vent on the bottom? Can
you raise it up a little bit for us? Oh, there you go.
On the vent here that goes all the way around. So that definitely helps in cooling, because even on my Phantom 3 out here in Phoenix on a 100-degree day, the motors get very, very hot.
Yeah. Yep, it can be paralyzing. Had that problem with the Inspire 1 in Lake Mead and the after inner drone, so I'm familiar with the problem of hot motors.
But if you want, I can walk you through all of the different CCAs that are on here and kind of the design and functionality of what they do.
So are you talking about the vision? Are you talking about everything, the vision system, how everything works together?
Pretty much.
I mean, if you can just give us a quick summary and kind of breakdown of what you found, I think that would be great.
Okay, sure. So as usual, the GPS compass or our receiver is on the top of the airframe here.
Okay.
Now, this is suspended because it's still attached to all 4 motors. And to actually remove the motors, you would actually have to desolder all of these connections, which would be a pain. So for each arm, you see so on the side here, these are the ESCs. So there's actually 2 ESCs per CCA. So we got a left side with 2 ESCs, and then the right side here is another ESC. Whereas in other copters, each arm would have its own separate ESC. Here, they combine them both 2 onto each board.
Interesting.
So in the back here, this is the power supply board. You see the battery slides in here. So all of the other components actually plug into this board and distribute power to the rest of the systems. So you can see the main black and red wires coming off the power distribution board that go around to each of the ESCs, right?
Gotcha. That thing seems like it's a lot more complicated. Like you said, it's not easily upgradable like the Solo. So if someone were to have a problem or break it, it seems like they would need very specialized service.
Yeah, I mean, when people had cracks before in the housing, it was like, well, I'll just buy a new shell and put it on. Well, I mean, this is going to be an all-day job just to get the shell apart, and you'll have to desolder everything, and it's really going to be a pain. And then you'll see here, there's a lot of these ribbon cables here, these thin, almost paper-like thin ribbon cables. So if any of those rip, I mean, you'll be out of luck because those are virtually impossible to repair on your own. Now, this was kind of cool, Paul. So remember we talked about they have dual compasses?
Mm-hmm.
So we also have dual IMUs now for the first time, inertial measurement units, which are very important in the stability of the copters. Well, this is the first one that has 2 of them now. All of them used to have 1. In the aviation industry, most aircraft have anywhere from 3 to 6, and that's for redundancy reasons, right? In case one fails, there's a backup. I haven't read anything about how DJI is using the 2 IMUs, if it's one's like a master-slave configuration or if they're using both of them and they're combining the data. But what they did is, here is a separate CCA, and you can see it has its own floating pads here, 4 of them, like you would see on a gimbal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's to isolate the vibrations from getting into the IMUs. And the 2 IMUs are like right here.
You have to lift it up again.
They're conformal coated, so they're very hard to see, but they're very, very tiny. So I mean, it's not like it's that impressive to see. What's more impressive is that they isolated them onto this separate CCA. I've never seen that done before.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. Did you fly it before you took it apart, or did you just go right in it and took it apart?
I did the software upgrade, and I made sure it powered on, and at least I could hover it in the house.
The house.
So at least I knew it was functional before I took it apart. So I'm optimistic that it will fly once it's all back together.
Was she pretty responsive when you did fly it in the house? Did the Phantom 4 feel similar to Phantom 3 or a little bit more sensitive?
I think it's more sensitive, but you can go into the controls and dial down the exponential and settings like that. But no, my main purpose was to initially just take it apart and actually see what was going on. And speaking of seeing, the biggest feature of this Phantom 4 are the optical sensors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time in a commercial drone we've had sense and avoid capabilities, right?
Well, yeah, and Unique was supposed to be that first drone, but they
Mm-hmm.
haven't come to market yet. So
Yeah, they were the talk at CES this
they
year,
were,
right?
weren't they?
And their CEO gave a big presentation, and they had the mountain biking set on stage, and the drone was following it. But since then, we haven't really heard much, and it's not actually been released to market yet.
Yeah.
I know the H is coming out soon, but I think the Sense and Avoid is going to be like an add-on board that people can.
That's what Eric and I were talking about. Eric Chang was just on the show, and he was saying, as far as price points concerned too, the Phantom 4 is the lowest price point where we've also seen Sense and Avoid, because even though Unique has already pushed a price drop on the Typhoon H, that lower price point doesn't actually include the Sense and Avoid technology.
Right.
Yeah.
And you saw Unique drop their price too, right? Just recently, before they even released it.
Yeah, which is very interesting. Very interesting. It just goes to show too the power that kind of DJI has in the market. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible.
I mean, none of us even knew that DJI was working on this Sense and Avoid. I mean, they were very hush-hush about it, and this is not something that they saw Unique do last year and like, oh, we better do it. I'm sure this has been going on for 1-2 years in development and testing.
Eric just said on the podcast they have been developing it for years, just like you said.
Yeah.
So,
but if you want, I can go through the sensors here for the Sense and Avoid.
No, it's okay. One of the questions I have, because I think people are more concerned with the capability of the sensors, not necessarily the technical aspect of the sensors themselves, but the ability. And I think, just like with the Matrice 100, you were kind of limited in speed as far as when the Sense and Avoid technology would actually work. Do you think the Phantom 4 has the computing power to work at a higher rate of speed than the Matrice 100? Because this is something that we want to test.
I'm pretty sure I've read somewhere that you can't fly it at the max speed of 44 miles an hour and have this Sense and Avoid kick in. I thought it was 20 miles an hour and below.
Well, 20 would be double what the Matrice did, so I still think that's a step up.
I'm still waiting for that first YouTube video that comes out where some guy just runs it full blast into its garage, just trying to test that theory out, right?
That might be us, so don't be surprised if you see us running it into a pole on purpose. So anyway, well, Andrew, thank you so much for giving us that breakdown. It seems like that's quite a lot of work that you've done there. Any other takeaways that you'd like to share before we head out?
No, I mean, this is we're in the 4th generation of drones now, and Sense and Avoid is the big buzz term going on right now. It's the big technology that the FAA definitely wanted to see integrated into these drones for safety reasons. Now, keep in mind, this is the 1st generation of Sense and Avoid, so it will have its quirks in there and stuff, but I'm pretty confident through software and upgrades, they'll work those issues out.
Cool. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. If we wanted to learn more about you, where can we go?
You can check out dronemediagroup.com. That's a group I'm affiliated with, or possibly Paul can release my email address and people can just email me there.
Okay.
Or find me on Facebook.
Okay. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. Are we going to be seeing you at NAB?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Drone Media Group's putting it all on again. And this time we're down in the Central Hall. So actually have one of the premier spots there. And DJI, 3D Robotics will all be nearby. So the whole drone community will be more unified this time at NAB than it was last year. Because
last year, for those of you who don't know, the drone pavilion was kind of I believe it was in the South Hall upper level.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And there was no one was up there. So I think that's a good change, good add-on. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show. And guys, let's head back to the studio. So Andrew Baker took that thing apart. I mean, what an incredible amount of work, but wow, the stuff that's inside there. I mean, it looks like they've actually made the camera body inside of the drone, eliminated the plastic. We've got dual IMUs now. We've got dual compasses. It seems like everything has really changed to create more redundancy, lighter airframe, smarter airframe. And, you know, a lot of people have been telling me, oh, sorry about that, Rob. A lot of people have been telling me, you know, the Phantom 4's got new motors and it flies really fast at 45 miles an hour. They're not new motors. I mean, as we learned from Andrew, they sit higher on the frame, so they're more efficient because they're cooler.
Right.
Now, I would guess that the Phantom 4 could probably actually fly faster than the Phantom 3 and Phantom 2. I got my Phantom 2 up to 70.
What about the Solo? Think it can fly faster than the Solo?
I don't know.
Probably not, huh?
I don't know. That's
Anyways.
a good question. Well, because here's the thing. The Phantom 4 is a little bit lighter
That's true.
than previous frames. There's the potential, but I honestly don't know the answer to that question, Rob.
Well, I just have to say I was blown away by the fact. I mean, I just love it. It's so foreign to me that the tinkerer type like Andrew, who's willing to spend whatever he spent on that drone, let's just say with everything $1,500, and then just rip it apart. And then he says, but I'm optimistic it'll fly when I get it back together.
And I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. I have
I'm sure it will
zero
too.
doubt. Zero doubt.
But he was just so calm and cool about it. I'm optimistic. I'd be freaking out.
I mean, this is the same guy who bought an S1000, I think it was like a year and a half ago or a year ago, and DJI didn't send him one of the connection plates for the arms. So he's got 7 arms that connect just fine and 1 arm that doesn't have it. And he went out in his garage and manufactured the little plate, put it in there, worked fine. So
I love it.
Like, this guy could create anything. That's why I think he brings so much value to you guys, and you don't have to spend the money. You can see what's kind of underneath the skin without having to break it. I mean, he did say how difficult it is to actually get in it. Sounds like these Phantoms are turning into iPhones.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's coincidence that is the manufacturing process now, and they're developing this relationship with Apple. It just seems to me there's some work going on together up to this point for them to get to that point where they're creating something that is so, what's the word? It can't be manipulated, essentially.
Yeah. Now, do you think the Phantom 4 is crash-proof?
No.
Good
of course
answer.
it's not crash-proof.
I saw an amazing article from Gizmodo about a guy who actually admitted to crashing it. And it's funny because he just crashed it sideways, because the vision's only forward. Unlike the guidance on the Matrice, which is 3 directions, this is only forward.
Well, and speaking of crash and the anti-crashing aspect of the drone, it was interesting. I think it was Eric that said he thought it could go up to 20 miles an hour and have the detection system still work. That was faster than I thought it would be.
That's double the speed of the Matrice 100, and I don't know what the speed is on the Unique with the RealSense technology yet. We haven't had the chance to really test those, but we do plan on doing a comparison with them, and we do plan on getting a Phantom for ourselves, and we do plan on absolutely testing the limits of the Phantom 4 and its guidance.
I know you want to test the limits. I almost think you want to test the limits more of the object, of the wall, than you do the drone.
Well, you know what maybe we should do is set up fake walls with toilet paper and run the drone into them. That way, if the drone stops,
there you go.
Great. If it doesn't stop, we're probably not going to lose the whole drone.
Maybe paper mache. Is that going to detect something that fine, though?
Well, here's the thing. It would be a different color. Remember, these are stereo cameras, so
Okay.
These are regular
That's true.
EO cameras. They're not using any special technology, just calculating distances off of 2 separate images, just like how you see in Pix4D, just like how you see in Drone Deploy. So
I hadn't really thought about that, but it's images and not sensors per se, right?
Well, it's 2 sensors. Those
Right.
sensors are cameras that are creating data for the computer to read to say what is our current distance from this point, the closest
it.
focus point that we're seeing. So
Clearly, I'm not a techie. I'm glad there are guys like Paul and Andrew around who can explain these things
I think
to all of us.
Andrew is cut above, to be
Well.
honest. So is Eric. So guys, thank you so much for joining the podcast. And guys, if you have questions, don't forget askdroneu.com. Don't forget, share this with a friend, and don't forget that tomorrow we are giving away a free membership for a year. This is the 300th episode.
That's right.
And it's time to do that.
But before we go,
Yes.
we do need to know from you, Paul. So, would you buy the P4? Just straight out, would you buy it? Now, keep in mind, everybody, that Paul has an Inspire 1, so that's going to be part of his answer. So maybe answer it if you didn't have an Inspire 1, or maybe even add if you have a P3, would you move up to the P4? Just
So,
kind of all of those into your answer.
I'll give you the different scenarios. Scenario 1, which is my real scenario. Do I have an Inspire 1? I have a Phantom 3 Pro. I have a Phantom 2. Would I buy a Phantom 4? No, probably not. Now, if I'm a photographer and I don't have an Inspire 1 and I've got a Phantom 3 Pro, should I buy the Phantom 4? Yes, because the glass is much better on the Phantom 4. It's the same sensor, but it's different glass.
Okay.
So you're going to get crisper images, a lot crisper images. Now, it's not going to be like an Inspire 1 X5, you know, if you're a real heavy photographer. But if you're a guy who takes aerial photos for a living, is the Phantom 3 going to be better than, or excuse me, is the Phantom 4 going to be better than the Phantom 3 as far as your photos are concerned? Absolutely. As far as video is concerned, not sold on that yet, Rob.
Okay.
So
What about just from a flight standpoint?
from
Not much difference.
From a
probably?
flight standpoint, I mean, you're definitely going to lower your liability for hitting things, but I don't think you're going to lower your liability very much. You know,
Right.
a lot of people have said, this is the first step in the direction of creating society-friendly drones, meaning people believe that these are crash-proof, but that's not the case.
Far from it.
So that being said, I think, you know, the need for knowledge, the need to actually know how to mitigate emergencies, the need to know, you know, what habits and routines can you form as a pilot to inhibit crashes, I think that need has only increased. So the need for that information has increased, and also exponentially, because I think you're going to see a lot more people buying these who have a false sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
They buy the drone, they crash it, and then they get mad at DJI, and most people are just going to tell them, dude, you still have to learn how to fly. You still have to learn how these things work.
That's an interesting point. It's probably a chapter that we should add to the Don't Crash course.
Well, I mean, remember, the Don't Crash course is drone specific, so we're probably going to have to shoot a whole new segment just with the Phantom 4.
Right.
So that being said, overall, you know, a lot of guys that just own Phantoms, I'm seeing them upgrade to a Phantom 4.
Mm-hmm.
But guys that own Inspire 1s and Phantoms, I'm not seeing a lot of people buying them.
Right.
But if you are thinking about getting a Phantom Pro, you can click this link right here and go get yours. It's a link right to the DJI store if you're thinking about it. Maybe we've hit a trigger point and you're ready to buy. I will say, one thing I'd love to explore is the sport mode. I want to see how much they've jacked up the gains and expo settings in sport mode, because some people are like, oh, well, you know, like I've gotten up to 45 and that's so fast. It's like, well, we've gotten our Phantoms up to 70, you know, level up, buddy. Like, come on. So that's why I want to get my hands on. That's why I want to get my hands on one and truly test it, because, you know, people think that they can fly, but unless they know some really detailed nuances, they're not going to be able to get the speeds to truly test the limitations. That's why I'm so excited to get one. So
Very cool. Well, hopefully we'll have one in here soon.
So Rob, when will we have one in here?
I
don't want to put you on the spot. Don't
I was
answer that
going to say
question.
that would be what you call the spot. Anyways, as Paul mentioned, we are going to be giving away the annual membership. We've been talking about that for a while. That was for people that asked questions that made it onto the podcast between about number 220 and 300. Obviously, we've hit 300. We'll do that in the next few days via some sort of random selection app or something. And then we'll let you know if you're a winner or not. So thank you, everybody, for asking questions. And again, if you have yours, askdroneu.com. Don't hesitate. Get on there and let us know what you're wondering about.
Definitely, guys. And also love seeing those photos on Instagram. Just tag us for a repost at thedroneu.com. Seriously, love it, guys. Love sharing that information. If you listen to this podcast and you didn't hear John Rupert's interview on Monday's episode, which was episode 298, that is the Drone Law Gold, at least the current Drone Law Gold. So make sure you listen to that on top of this episode, which will be available on YouTube shortly, but is already available through the normal Podomatic means, which iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, all those different ways to get podcasts. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for us today. Hope you learned something. Let us know if you did. Let us know your reaction. We would love to hear it. And guys, thank you so much for always listening. My name is Paul.
And I'm Rob.
This is Ask Drone U.
We believe that videos, images, words, and sounds have the absolute power to inform, inspire, and entertain. We are united under the virtues of safety and knowledge. We are a training community of learners and teachers who encourage and energize each other to achieve greatness. We are pilots, videographers, photographers, freelancers, business owners, enthusiasts, experts, and apprentices. We are creators. We are the Drone Youth.